It's been a while since I posted a video, but that doesn't mean that I haven't been recording. That said, expect several videos in the next month. Hello, welcome to Jessi's Craft Corner. I mentioned in my last video that when I get stumped or delayed on a project, I switch to another one. This one has had some real stumpers, which I will talk about at the end of the video. One of the problems that I ran into was that I couldn't get a hold of elastic for the knees. To be fair, the elastic shortage was for a good cause, so thank you to everyone out there who spent their time and money to make masks for those in need. Now that I have been able to get a hold of elastic, let's get started. The shoes are made pretty much the same as I did the gloves in part 1. I built up the base of the feet with epoxy and then covered the base with knit fabric. To create the ridges on the boots, I used 2 strands of upholstery thread and glued them to the shoes. The base color I used is called Cable Knit Gray. I started painting in the details with a darker hippo gray, but unfortunately I lost the footage because I can't stay in frame. The soles of the shoes are shaped from 1/8 inch plastic, which I sanded down to a taper, so the heels would be the thickest part. Using a scalpel, I trimmed the excess material off the bottom of the foot so there would be a flat surface to adhere the sole to. With the soles attached, I painted the base with a hippo gray and sealed it with a couple coats of matte Mod Podge. On to the vest. It's made of 2 identical pieces sewn together across the waist and the bottom of the armholes. I left the top of the arms open so that I would be able to add the shoulder tabs later. With the vest sewn, I flipped it right side out and ironed it. I went ahead and seamed the shoulders of the shell together, leaving the lining open. At this point, I set aside the vest body to work on the shoulder caps. These pieces are so small that I think it was much easier to sew by hand rather than using the machine. This seam was then pressed open, folded flat, and pressed again. After adding the stitching detail, I sewed the caps right sides together to the shell of the vest and pressed it flat. I then flipped the vest inside out and stitched lining fabric to the caps and shoulder seams. The collar was attached using the same method. Now that both sleeve caps were attached, I top stitched around the arm and waist openings of the vest. I installed 4 super magnets in the back of the vest, sandwiched between the shell and the lining. This is to give me an easy way to attach the jetpack later. Each magnet was centered on the cross mark. Hopefully this will make it easier to line up with the jetpack in the future. I then sewed around each magnet to lock it in place. Because the magnets were so slippery, I found it was much easier if I sandwiched the magnet between 2 other magnets to hold it in place while sewing. Sewing so many magnets close together did turn out to be kind of tricky since they kept wanting to snap together. I ended up holding the first magnet between my ring and pinky fingers to keep it away from the second one while I was sewing it in place. With all the magnets attached, I went ahead and stitched up the back edges of the vest. Now that the vest is finished, I can put it on Boba. I then folded under the back edges of the vest, pinned it in place, and sewed up the back seam. I'm sure this is the part of the video you've all been waiting for, the armor. Using some thin plastic from a yard sale sign, I sanded it to give the paint something to grip to later, and then traced out each of the armor plates as well as any key cutouts or bend points. For the chest plates, it was easier to trace them all as one piece and then separate them to make sure that they all fit together. Using a scalpel, I carefully scored the edges of each plate, taking extra care on the jetpack slots. Then I snapped off the excess plastic with the small pliers, working my way through like a puzzle until all of the parts were cut out. The armor pattern that I'm using is a super shrunk down copy of the Wizard of Light costume templates. The second round of pieces is for all of the armor plates that require more than one layer. This thick chunk of plastic I'm setting on the knees is a shaping block to help me get the ankles uniform when I heat shape them later. this point, my hands started cramping from making all the precise cuts. I used a heat gun to shape the plates, which I tried to record, but the gun kept blowing the plates away. It's not really very different from shaping Warbler, it's just a little more difficult and a lot less expensive. It also has the advantage of building up really crisp 3D details. On to paint. And boy, I gotta tell ya, trying to mix the perfect shade of boba green is really, really hard. Trying to find that perfect mix of green, blue, and gray takes a lot of trial and error and a lot of wasted paint. You may notice that I have all of the chest plates taped together. I actually did this before I heat shaped it to make sure that everything lined up correctly. Turned out to still be useful during the painting process, so I just left it that way. With each coat, I change the direction of my brush strokes, which results in a smoother final coat. 3 coats in, I decided the color wasn't quite right, so I started messing around with the paint. This is why I hate mixing custom paint. It's so wasteful. Fail in 3, 2, 1. Time for some weathering. Using the darker bits of the green, I went ahead and did the first pass, and then went in with yellow paint and a fine detail brush. For all of the damage, I've been referencing the excellent library of pictures and diagrams that have been collected by the 501st. Listening to the audio, I just realized that every time my brush touches the plates, I'm holding my breath. Weathering the chest plate was pretty much the icing on the cake for this part of the build. Had to darken the yellow a bit more. I thought the weathering looked a little bit too dark, so I dabbed some yellow back over it, and then patted it off with a paper towel to tone down the contrast. Added in some little bits of silver weathering. I'm sorry, but I painted the decals off camera because I had to get the plates really, really close to my face to get them accurate. Then I sprayed all the paints with a clear satin sealant to protect the paint job. I made these small rings for the back plate and then glued a little bit of gray ribbon to it, which was fed through the slots on the back plate and glued in place. On the actual costume, these are what the jetpack actually hangs on and are attached to what looks like the frame of a hiking backpack. Since our jetpack will be mounted with magnets, these are just here for decoration and technical accuracy. For my super advanced attachment method, I used hot glue. It works shockingly well for attaching plastic to fabric. To create the famous Boba thong, I glued a ribbon attaching the cod plate to the kidney plate. Ideally, I would have used elastic instead, but I was unable to find any that was narrow enough. I may upgrade this in the future if I come across some 1/8" elastic. I used a needle and thread to connect the cod and kidney plates together through pre-drilled holes. I kept the threads loose and then slid them on like a pair of underwear, and then tightened the threads and tucked them off. The last piece of armor I'll be tackling in this video is the knee plates. You may have noticed in the earlier clips of my painting that they were missing the dart housings. I'm going to address that now. Using a 1/4" square dowel, I cut off 2 small blocks and then marked out the sizing for the dart housings for my pre-made template. Using sandpaper and a scalpel, I sanded and carved the blocks down to the correct shape. I then attached the housings to the outside of each knee plate with super glue. There are 2 types of knee darts. For the first one, I'm using 18 gauge wire as a base, and then very thin strips of aluminum tape to build up the raised area. With the second strip, I repeated the process, wrapping it as close to the first as possible while still leaving a small gap. Wow, that is tiny. Now to make 2 more. For the second type of dart, I used a toothpick. I started by trimming down the end to the correct length, and then sanded it back into a point. After trimming off the excess, I drilled small holes in the housings and glued the darts in place. This was the first batch of paint I mixed, and boy was my color matching way off. Added in a little brown. This turned out much closer to the original paint that I used. This is how the finished knee plates turned out, with all of the weathering added. All that's left is to mount them. Using some narrow elastic, I painted it gray and then measured it around Boba's leg. After coating the center back of the knee plates with super glue, I lined up the elastic and held it in place until it was secure. On a side note, I ended up adding 18 gauge wire to the inside of the knees to reinforce the side tabs. On full-size armor, they have a tendency to bend or break, and I noticed the miniature set was showing early symptoms of the same problem. I decided to head it off before it became an issue. Here's where the project's at so far. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that there were a couple of parts I was having a hard time figuring out. The first is the helmet. I have a couple ideas that I've been turning over, so there'll be a future video dedicated to experimenting with this. If I'm lucky, the first one will work. If not, well, you can expect a failure montage. The second part that I'm having trouble with is the jetpack. which I have yet to be able to come up with any good solutions for. It's probably going to be the most difficult part of this project, so if you have any suggestions or ideas, please post them in the comments section below. The third is the gauntlets and the pistol, but I'm pretty confident about these, so hopefully it goes smoothly. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video and want to see what comes next, please join me for part 4. As always, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.